Dr. Gerry Crete and I used to work together, and that's how I know Gerry. And we were counselor educators together. And I had Gerry come to one of my couples and family courses and do a live demonstration of working with a couple. And it was really fantastic. Gerry is just a wonderfully warm human being. He is the founder and clinical director of Transfiguration Counseling. He is a trauma therapist. So he does a lot of work with trauma and anxiety disorders. And then also just has a lot of experience with adolescents, adults, and couples. So he is a Catholic. And so he has done a lot of work with the Catholic Church and priests, and people who are religious often come to him because they would like to have their faith incorporated into the work that they're doing with their therapist. But not everyone. Obviously, anyone can go to him and seek help from Transfiguration Counseling. But what I love is that we talk a lot about attachment theory. And one of my favorite things that we talk about in this podcast episode is that we talk about God not failing us, that humans, we're capable of failing each other, but God does not fail us as our ultimate secure attachment. So I thought that that was a really important piece of the conversation that we have. We also talk about parts, which is really fun to talk about the different parts of people. And I loved hearing Dr. Crete's take on that. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed talking with Dr. Crete. So I'm super excited to have you on the show. So welcome, Dr. Crete, to the Nourished Soul Podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen you. You look fabulous. You look healthy.
Oh, thank you.
Happy.
Yes, doing well. And you do as well. It's good to see you again. It's been a few years.
It has. Yeah. So I wanted to start. So the reason I wanted to have you on originally, I was thinking I love talking in parts. And I had thought about talking about these parts of ourselves and how we can nourish each of the parts in hopes of kind of having integration, is what I was thinking. And then I started poking around and learning more about what you're doing these days with souls and hearts. And I thought, oh, well, we need to talk about that. And then I've also been reading your prayers that you wrote. So we have to talk about that too.
All right.
So we have a lot to talk about.
That's great.
I know. So I will do an introduction of you, kind of a formal, but I thought it might be helpful if we talk about your work. So in counseling and Transfiguration Counseling, kind of how you came up with that name, and then what you're mostly seeing still couples, I think.
I see a variety.
Everybody.
I probably focus with, I have a lot of trauma-informed focus, addiction, couples, you name it. And it's a small practice. So I do have 5 therapists with me as well. And we're actually in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. So we've expanded.
That's great. That's exciting. So tell me about your name, how you came up with Transfiguration Counseling. And is that always a term that's spiritual, or is that just what I think of it?
Well, yes, it comes right. No, it's very spiritual, and it comes right out of the Bible. And it's that kind of mysterious moment in the Gospels where Jesus takes John and Peter and James, and they go up a mountain, and suddenly Elijah and Moses appear, kind of like visions, and then Jesus is transformed. And so it's kind of a moment where the apostles get to see his fullness of his divine nature as well as his human. And so I kind of like it because it's in counseling, in at least my approach, working kind of from a Christian perspective, that we want to help reveal our true nature. Obviously, we're not God, we're not divine, but we have our own deepest inmost self is created in his image. And when we really do allow that to be present and allow that, we discover so much about ourselves. So it's really about discovering your true self, if you will, or your inmost self, as I like to say.
Right. So do most of the people who come to you, are they religious or at least spiritual, or do some people just don't know what
Yeah.
that means and they come anyway?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're accepting of anyone who would come in and looking for help, and we wouldn't never like impose something religious on someone. But most of the time, our referrals are coming from pastors, priests, people in the church, and they're looking for something that includes their faith. And they're usually happy to find us because it's hard to find that in regular counseling. And the way I would, or at least if the counselor is open to spirituality, which is so important because it's such an integral part of who we are, but they may not understand their faith or appreciate it. And so how I look at it is, whoever comes, I get to know them, understand their faith, and that is often, or almost always, becomes a resource in their healing, in their growth, in the work that we're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, I would agree. Just in the work that I've done, I started and I didn't incorporate spirituality because I didn't know if we could, the way that we were trained, to be super open and not talk about anything spiritual or religious until the client brings it up. And I found that if you leave that piece out, you're leaving a huge piece, particularly in trauma work. It's important.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I got excited. Is it all right for me to hop around?
Yeah. Hop around.
Because you mentioned those litanies, their prayers that I wrote, and what inspired that, I think it flows from what we were just saying, is that people need to have security in their lives and a safe place. Like, so I really like attachment theory. I'm sure you remember attachment theory.
Oh yeah.
And
yep.
Yes, Bowlesby and Ainsworth and all that. Yep. And then Sue Johnson focused couples therapy brings in attachment theory and applies it to couples work.
Right.
And the reality is we never get our full secure attachment with other people because other people are broken too. That, and in our closest relationships, we can have a sense of safety and security, but people fail us, even our spouses or our mothers and fathers, friends. And so, but my belief is that God doesn't, and that Christ is the ultimate secure attachment, is the ultimate place where we find our security. And so these prayers were designed to go from our insecurity, right, our place of I'm wounded in some way, or I'm closed off, or I'm fearful, to bring us into relationship, in connection, and into actually safety and security with God. So that's kind of was where I was going with it, was to apply or integrate the psychological theory,
right,
in a way with the spirituality and the faith.
Right, which I think is brilliant. And I love that there are three different, that you have the guarded heart, the wounded heart, and what's the last one?
Fearful.
Oh yeah, I'm fearful, of course, because it, with attachment theory, so people might not understand the research of attachment theory. So we might want to talk about that for a minute, and how that, relates to the work that you're doing now.
Yeah. I mean, I think that originally when attachment theory was kind of developed, right, with Bowlesby and that, and Mary Ainsworth, was this idea of like originally it was the mother-child bond, and the whole stranger danger thing, where how does a child react when a stranger walks into the room, or when the mother leaves the room with the stranger there, and all this. And what they found was that there were typical reactions, and by children. And sometimes they were very afraid of the stranger. And sometimes they were, to their mother, or whatnot as a result, or our other children just walked off with the stranger.
Right.
And so
Right.
there's a research behind, all these different reactions, and eventually the idea of these different insecure attachment styles were kind of formulated. So we have the type of attachment style, the avoidant, right? The one who withdraws, who, it's an adaptive measure to protect oneself, is to withdraw.
Right.
Or another style is to be anxious,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps reactive. And then another style is to be a little bit going between the two, where, I want attachment, I want connection, but I'm also afraid of it. And so we all have all of those, I think. I mean, most human beings react in some insecure ways in different times, settings. But we tend to have dominant style. Yeah. So my thinking was that those prayers, everyone could use all of them, but then there would be one that probably an individual might go, oh, but that one speaks to me the most.
Right. Yeah. And I love the way that you talk about building trust. Like, this is being vulnerable and building trust. And so I wanted to talk about trust, because I've become pretty clear over the last several years, but really that trust is an important piece in our healing, in our nourishment. And so, I work with it personally still. I have, and I use trust in my mantra for my meditation. I trust myself. I trust God is one that I use a lot. And sometimes it kind of feels like it's a little lie that I'm just faking it till I make it, just to keep saying it. But I keep saying it and I keep working on it, because I think if you don't have trust, then we're not going to have full healing. But I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I like that. I like this question. I think that we all experience, just because of our fallen world, or just because of our, the way things are, we start off out of innocence, right? Like that beautiful baby, right? In the maternal gaze, or the, deep connection and then something and we have total trust. We have no other reason. We have no options other than to be that vulnerable and trust. Cared for appropriately. It's always very sad when a very young, like a baby or whatnot, and those doesn't get that nurturing initially, and that causes really deep, more serious issues. But most of us experience some measure of trust and safety early on, but then along the way something happens, or lots of things happen to disrupt that trust. So I think that, and this might link in a little bit to the part which you mentioned at the beginning, but I think what happens is we have developed parts of ourselves that don't trust.
Right.
And I think that's understandable, because at some point our mom or dad or whoever is going to let us down and break our trust. Right. And or it happens at school, or it happens, various places. And so we have parts that we resistant, would have negative views of God, would have negative views of others, and maybe even not even trust oneself. Right. In so many ways. So it's a big topic.
It is a big topic. Yeah.
The way I would approach it a little bit there would be, if you can recognize a part of yourself that is not open, is not trusting, we have maybe a natural tendency to be like, have some other parts of ourselves or whatever say, oh, stop that, you're bad, or you should trust more, what's wrong with you? And so we shame those parts, or we just sort of dismiss them. And I don't feel like that's helpful. And instead, I think it's so important, right, to actually try to encounter and meet those parts and understand them. Right. Because, like if you met a little child, let's say, who was scared and didn't trust grownups, right, you wouldn't begin by saying, oh, come on, get over it. You should be better than that. And yet we do that to ourselves, a lot of us. Yes. But we would never do that if we actually met a child that was struggling. So I do a lot of work with trying to help people encounter those parts that aren't trusting, that don't have faith.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so important, and to
Yeah.
meet them and to understand them as a beginning point rather than trying to change them, and to enter into it with curiosity, like, what happened? How did this happen?
Right.
And
Right. Yeah. And how do you see prayer helping with that?
well, it's a big, again, that's almost another big, but because some people are going to have parts
Mm-hmm.
that are going to be resistant to even prayer, the idea of praying,
Right.
and have trust issues with God. So that's a possibility. I think there are other parts. We have parts that are right, are that are wanting to like be gung ho, let's pray all the time and let's do it right, and everything
Right.
else. So we have like those probably some competing things going on, and I like to just again acknowledge all those different parts, and try to enter, if possible, a deeper kind of prayer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like acknowledge the different parts, and maybe the ones that are not trusting, and maybe the ones that are gung-ho. Actually ask all of them to wait a little bit. Ask all of those different parts to just sort of stand on the side nearby, and see if you can enter into a moment of prayer from that deeper, that inmost self. And we usually have to be able to get a little bit a recognition of our different internal parts,
Right.
and give them a little space, right? Give them a place to observe
Mm-hmm.
and access that inmost self. And I think in that, and a lot of times we don't do that because we're busy with prayers. Maybe we're reading a prayer like the litanies, or we're just saying our prayers, or we're trying to talk to God a lot. But to the place where our self is actually just coming to God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that quiet and that silence and that space can be very fruitful, because there we're actually going to receive the trust, the sense of trust and security, and the faith that we need is going
Mm-hmm.
to come from, in my opinion anyway, is going to come from there.
Right.
Not just because we taught to God.
Right. Right. From that. So I love that. The idea of talking to those parts. And it feels like it's going to, that would take some work probably to identify the parts, to get to know some of these parts, to ask them to stand
Mhm.
back a little, put them in their place, so that feels to me like that could take some time. May not, it might be quick, but
Yeah.
that feels like that would take some work for some people.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it takes a lot of work. I don't think it comes immediately naturally to most people. I think that it's kind of a focus of the therapy I do with people, is to help them to do that, and help them to do that on their own.
Right.
I think that we can, like, the simple steps would
Yes.
be to pause and notice, right? And I like to imagine like inside, almost like my inner living room is what I call it. And just sort of like check in there, who's in there. And so it might mean that I need to pause for a moment, do some of the deep breath, like taking a deep breath,
Mm-hmm.
sort of like looking inside and saying, is there some part of me right now that's super active? Is there some part of me that is thinking a lot, or that is feeling a lot? Or is there a memory that's sort of bothersome? Or just like taking that moment to be mindful, to be a little bit that game. And normally when you do that, something will show up. And the biggest question I ask a person, if they identify kind of a part, is, how do you feel toward that part? So if I stop right now, even like there's a part of me that I'm in the middle of doing this show, so like I'm like kind of like thinking like, okay, how am I doing, and what am I doing, and what am I going to do next? Or like there's a busy bee mind
Yeah.
at work.
Right.
And it's and that's fine, and that's good. And then if I ask myself, how do I feel about that busy bee mind part?
Mm-hmm.
Then what will happen is typically is another part will speak up. If, in other words, like, oh, he's full of himself, or he's, whatever, like or he's doing great or something. But if something shows up that's like, it's probably another part. So if it's like, oh, he's full of himself shows up, then that's a part that's self-critical, right? There's a critical part. And so now if what I'm doing is I'm teasing out those parts, and you're just sort of wanting to get them out there in order to then, once they're kind of teased out and you're actually attending to them a little, that's where you discover the inmost self, as I call it.
Wow. Yeah. That feels like the work that I've been doing in therapy for 10 years, but yet not quite like that.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But not called that, not, what I did is I said, I want to live with my whole heart, like all in, wholehearted, when I went into therapy 10 years ago. Right. And so that's what we've been doing. And what I've found is that I needed to container quite a bit because a lot of it was very disorienting. So I'm just thinking, with working with these parts, do you find that it is actually helps people with more integration, or do they need to container a little bit too, to have some, what we might call, well, in EMDR, we'd have some self-care things that we'd put in place, right?
Yeah. Here, I have a few thoughts.
Okay, good.
I wouldn't say, I wouldn't, I personally don't say integration.
Okay.
And I like harmony.
Oh, I like that word.
And the reason, is because I think the point is not that all these parts have to somehow be integrated into one monad.
Right.
It's that the parts need to be valued for the individual richness that they each bring.
Right.
They need to have be unburdened from whatever stuff they're carrying, in order to have a really good relationship with the core self. And so there's a harmony that happens in your inner world, that when that happens, it just, you just feel alive and you're feeling in a more whole way or full way. So I will say that. I will say something else, because I'm also an EMDR therapist, and I'm actually an EMDR consultant and all this. And so I love EMDR. But one of the things I discovered as I got to know and learn about parts with internal systems and ego state therapy was that I was doing EMDR with clients often on their parts. And sometimes I was working with a manager, we call a manager part or a protective part, and not the exile. And it's not that that's bad necessarily,
right.
But I didn't know that that's what was. So understanding the people's parts has actually helped me do EMDR better.
Right.
Because I'm a little bit more aware of the process. If I'm working with a part, like that critical voice part that I brought up a moment ago about myself, oh, he doesn't know what he's saying or something like this. Well, that's a part that for whatever reason thinks that he has to tear me down in order to feel like somehow like he's protecting me or something, which obviously doesn't sound good because it's sort of toxic. Right. But what I realized then is that part needs to be unburdened from the belief that he had, like at some point or another, I learned I had to tear myself down in order to function for some reason, and so that part might be good at discernment and critiquing and evaluation, but doesn't need the toxicity of the negative belief that I must torn down in some way or whatever. And so the EMDR processing might be around helping that part let go of that.
Right.
So that the part itself can be a much more healthy functioning aspect of me.
Got it.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I'm thinking, now that you know that because if you're working with a part that's not doing that, you're not working with a wounded part, And you're right. Not that that's bad, because you're still
Yeah.
processing things and you're having some healing, but deeper healing. That sounds like that's really powerful
Hmm.
for people. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
And it is, no, it's very good, and you're more intentional and purposeful, and you know kind of what
Mhm.
it's about. The other side of it that I've discovered is why some clients, when you think you've had this amazing healing session,
Mhm.
why they regressed very quickly after.
Right.
And the reason, I think, is that you bypass these protective managers in EMDR, get to the wounded exile,
Mhm.
and you do this work that seems important, but you've not included or taken into account that manager's job. And so now the manager is actually kind of like offended, like he's been bypassed, and he's clinging to a role that has now just been disrespected, kind of, and he's actually, that part is angry, and then and it's on and actually drives in harder as a result. And so I've learned that I have to get permission from these manager parts of people before I go do work with the more wounded parts, because it's a little bit like this guy or this woman or whatever that's been a protector has, maybe they haven't done it in what I would consider a healthy way, but they may have been doing it for 40 years and thinking I have to keep out all danger or whatever. Like art that is a wall. Let's say it's like a wall,
Mhm.
of emotional wall, keeps out emotions, keeps out vulnerability, keeps out all
Mhm.
those things, right?
Right.
Well, if I get around the wall and find the part that's really wounded, that wall is going to be like mad, if you will, and might actually get higher as a result.
Mhm.
Instead, I actually first meet the wall, like understand it and be like, why are you a wall? You've been a wall for a long time, and what makes you a wall, and what did you know, and this kind of thing, and you almost have to get the wall to realize, you know, there's you've kind of, there's been a loss. Being a wall all the time means the whole system
Mhm.
not had access to emotions, or the whole system, you know, I get it that you have been protecting.
Mhm.
Wow, you're amazing. This wall is an amazing wall. But maybe is it okay if we try something new? Is it okay if we create a little door or a little window? And at least let's just see what happens. And so you're getting that protective part to kind of buy in and
Mhm.
agree to at least try, even if it's just, hey, let's just do this for 15 minutes. And then maybe the wall and your other parts get to observe something new. So they're included in the healing, right? Which sometimes, I think with the EMDR and some other therapies, we
Mhm.
haven't taken any of that into account.
No.
Obviously.
Right. Well, we didn't
Mhm.
know to. That's why I'm sitting here going, I'm so glad that you consult, because how are people supposed to know if we don't talk about this and we don't teach it? Because
Mhm.
that's very helpful.
Mhm. Yeah, and use like container, like I've done exercises, and that can be helpful, right? But I personally now would be more likely to engage the part that might need to go into a container, because putting it into a container kind of, unless you're sure to go back to it, which I think you're supposed to, but is a bit, can feel like you're dismissing it or
Being
ignoring it.
disrespectful. Right. Yeah,
I would,
yeah. Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
But there's, every situation is unique, and clinically you have to make decisions about what's the most helpful in that moment. So I actually want to backtrack and just say, I'm not like saying all container activities are wrong or unhelpful.
Right.
There's just other ways sometimes of approaching those.
Definitely. And I think for me, I had to learn what I mean by contain in order to have what I would call alchemy, this change internally. I had to have a strong enough, um, I just had to have things in place where I could take really good care of myself when I could notice that I'm not doing so well right now. What's going on? Um, meditation was helpful, but also just mainly just to slow down and notice. So that,
Mhm.
that kind of thing, so that I could process what was happening. Because sometimes it was really fast. The things would be changing internally very quickly, even though my outside looked exactly the same. And, we'd have to go do our day, teach a class or see
Right.
some clients. And so, to not feel like I was going crazy, I think that's what I mean by container for me,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
think, yeah, go ahead. Do you have a thought about that?
No, I was just,
Can I bring up anything?
no, that's really cool. I think the way I look at it a little bit now, and it's
Yeah.
been an evolution for me,
Yeah.
would be, there are parts like that, if they're troubled parts for some reason, and you do some work with them, maybe this is like a container, but a lot of times, like, I make the container really nice. Like, I say I have the inner living room, but I have like lots of little bedrooms attached.
Mhm.
And so, you know what I mean? So if there are parts that are
Yeah.
having a hard time or that need more care,
Yeah.
but we don't have, we're not going to be able to solve it all right away, then I like to give them nice bedrooms and nice
To
playrooms.
rest and
Yeah.
yeah.
And check in on them. They're not in jail or in a dungeon. I guess
Right.
that's
Yeah.
what I want to do, is like, and having that awareness is actually kind of comforting, right? So we're not locking any part of ourselves away so much. It's just in a
Giving them
comfortable place, I guess.
giving them some comfortable, place to rest. Absolutely. Yeah, that's really fascinating. And how did you come to that work? Did you always kind of think in parts, or has that been an evolution for you too?
It's been an evolution. I think that some of it came initially like as an EMDR therapist resourcing.
Mhm.
And so I started doing a lot of resourcing with clients that needed it. So like a resource would be like, well, if an activity that you do, I think you know what a resource is, but just to explain a
Oh,
little,
yeah.
an activity that you do to help a client gain some strength in some area, maybe, or develop something that they need before you do certain work. They serve different functions, but like if you had a client that never had an attachment with their mother, let's say,
Mhm.
and you might do a resource to help them, like to experience a little bit what it's like to be a baby loved by a mother. Like there's certain resources that help you do that. Well, so I was really fascinated by the whole idea of resourcing, and eventually it led me to some of the work in my EMDR training was based on Ron Kurtz's stuff. It's Deb Kennard who kind of explained it to me, and that we have these like different characters, so they're like
Yeah.
roles. So if I was the, if I was highly traumatized,
Mhm.
I might become invisible. Like, so I'm like the
Mhm.
invisible one who no one sees, safer to be invisible and
Mhm.
not be noticed. So I go about my life being not seen. Or others that other character types that are the life of the party, and then that's my way. So all these are like over developments in some
Mhm.
way of some
Mhm.
aspect of self in order to adapt to whatever trauma. So that made sense to me. So I was already
Yeah.
thinking in terms of types, and how some people are, I'm like the doer, or I'm the independent one, or any of
Mhm.
these characters. And then you stop and pause and say, okay, well, if I am really good at being the independent one,
Mhm.
that means I have, maybe because I learned how to do one's going to take care of me. What I do have to learn now as an adult who is safe and who's now an adult and has loving people in my life, I
Mhm.
now have to learn, hey, I can trust others, or I can start depending on others. Like I have to look at where was I not developed. So that sort of
Mhm.
idea led to doing some work in training in clinical hypnosis and some
Right.
training in ego state therapy,
Uh-huh.
and where they really do kind of have an understanding of parts
Right.
and work, like kind of like the inner child work where you're working with an inner child,
Mhm.
or Gestalt,
Mhm.
the empty chair. So
Mhm.
you're right, there is an implication of some kind of part you're working with.
Right.
So that kind of is what led to that, and some internal family systems training and things. And so that just exploded actually my practice, because I just found it so helpful, and clients were actually using, like in using their parts, like not using, working with their parts
Mm-hmm.
outside of the sessions, and
Yeah.
coming back and saying how helpful it was. And I
Mm-hmm.
really found that to be, so rewarding.
Yeah, clearly. If it's working, people are coming back and saying this was helpful out of session, because most of the work I've found is out of session. You've got the hour maybe
Mm-hmm.
with people and you're digging some stuff up or doing that work, which is fantastic, but then they have to go live their lives. So a lot of it, actually, to be able to find something that's helpful for people, I think that's how you figure out but you're also really good at helping people identify feelings. We called you the emotional hound dog, as I recall, like helping people.
I think it was couples whisperer.
Couples whisperer.
Like maybe it was
go.
emotional hound dog too.
Yeah, but you can really dig in there and help people identify what they're actually feeling, as opposed to all the names of feelings that we put on top. And that's just a gift that you have that I witnessed personally when you were doing a live demonstration, and I saw that in you. So
yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I think that that came into it as well. It plays into all these different threads play together in terms of developing kind of your approach to doing therapy. And I do a lot of noticing, especially with men, because I have more men client base than I have women, and I like that challenge, because men were not really raised to be very in touch with our emotions, or even able to identify them, let alone express them. And so I'm really aware of language and the way that people speak about emotions. I might even annoy people sometimes with my need to like be precise, but people will say things like, "Oh, how do you feel? I feel abandoned, or I feel rejected." And so I do really noticing those words, because you may or may not be abandoned. You might be, but it's not actually a feeling. It's actually a reality, or it's not a reality, or rejection. You might be correct that you reject it. It's not actually an emotion. So we and women included, right? Use language in a way that guards us, because it's a much more powerful, really vulnerable thing to say. When you left, I felt hurt, or I felt pain, I felt sad, felt lonely. That's that emotion getting at that deeper level. And I think we talk with each other, we'll say, "Oh, well, you rejected me, or were mean to me, or something," and the person goes, "Oh, no, I wasn't." And it doesn't go anywhere. But when somebody says, "When that happened, I felt hurt," and they're speaking from the inmost self, if possible, then it has a way of transforming the conversation and changing it. And it has a way of opening up the other person's heart to listen more and to get more curious, and rather than to be simply reactive. So
Yeah, beautiful. And so tell me a little bit, since we're talking about opening hearts, tell me how hearts and souls and hearts came to be, and what is
souls and hearts.
souls and hearts, because I kept wanting to say heart and soul. I was like, no, it's souls first, souls and hearts. Yeah. How did that come to be?
Yeah. So that has been an interesting journey. I have a good friend who's a psychologist in Indiana, Dr. Peter Malin.
Yeah.
I have this little group, and this one guy, Dr. Peter Malinowski, is a member, and we realized that there really wasn't good resources out there, mental health resources for, in particular, Catholic Christians. Like, that was our main population, broader than just Catholics. but that was our main focus. And so we started by doing like some blogs, and we created some courses, and the courses are still on there. There's free ones on just like how to find a therapist or how to help someone in need, stuff like that. And then we developed a few paid, like one is about for couples, and if you have like if there's an issue of pornography in the marriage and you're wanting to change that, then this course is for you. We have another one that's for people just in vocation, like discerning whether they want to become like a priest or enter some kind of Christian ministry. So we have a course on that as well. And the courses were fine, and they were doing okay. But then things kind of took off when we created these communities. So we have these online communities, and one of them is called Resilient Catholics, and it's kind of came out of the COVID thing, and people like, it started with initially this a lot of people expressing a lot of anxiety and stuff, and so this community was just people developed that are coming together to kind of support each other in developing resilience. And we formed one for therapists and one for men. So we've got these. So this thing kind of was took on a life of its own. So we had some podcasts, communities, courses, blogs, and I never thought I would have to learn about marketing and podcasts and online things, and it's been a journey.
Yeah, and now you have prayers that you've written that people can. That's where I've been, and I'm not a Catholic. I'm a Jesus girl, so it's the prayers work for me, but I think they could work for people who are not Catholics for sure.
Absolutely. And I'm very ecumenical in my, and I've worked for I've done work at, I actually taught at Liberty University for a while, and I taught at a Christian, I was a school counselor at a Christian school and stuff. So I'm very ecumenically minded. And when I wrote those prayers, I was thinking about how anyone could use them. I mean, Catholics, Orthodox, Lutherans, and Anglicans would be familiar with the format of litany more than others, but I don't think there's anything objectionable. And what was funny is my wife was going for a walk with this neighbor, and her neighbor has a lot of anxieties, and very lovely lady. And my wife said, "Hey, do you want to pray these litanies?" My husband wrote them. And she said, "Okay." And at first she was like very distracted, and then like they prayed them, and she wasn't sure the impact, because the lady didn't say a whole lot. And then the next day they go out for their walk again in the morning, and the neighbor's I'm not sure what she's not Catholic, but she's Christian. And she said, "Oh, can we pray those again?" And they've been praying them every morning together, which is so cool.
That is
and
very
I think
cool.
it's, and yeah.
Well,
I feel like they're for everyone.
Yeah, very helpful. And I thought, I like having words sometimes, to actually, because you can listen to the prayer, you can download it and read it, or you can read it yourself, speak it, or you can listen to it. And so I've done all of those. And I like,
oh, great.
I think it's very helpful. I think to have what you're doing is building trust, and there are words to use it, and it's backed by the attachment theory research. I mean, you had that in mind, but also from your heart created these litanies, prayers.
I love, like, to me the flow would be that you're coming first to Jesus, just saying, "Here I am, and so have mercy." Like, just, I need your help. And then it moves. It moves to like, then like open my heart, like, and then a little bit of like who Jesus is, and then what Jesus can do. And then so it moves from open my heart to then hold, and then, it leads to him holding you, and then ultimately to that I trust, which you're getting at with this whole issue of trust. And so I think it's a journey. the prayer takes you on a journey is the idea. So I'm so thrilled that you're appreciated and that
Well, I'm glad you
helpful.
sent it to me so that I could, I thought that's it. And I think, the words that spoke really to me though, is when to hand Jesus, to surrender your heart full of joy and not full of joy, full of hope and not full of hope. I was like, yeah, because sometimes you feel like you should have more hope or more joy. And when you're surrendering, you surrender with the joy and without the joy, with hope and without hope.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you saw that. I think that's just honesty, right? Like we're just coming with full authenticity and just, this is where I am, or where I might not, and I'm not going to pretend. Right. So I love that part of it. And I tell people too, if there's a line you don't like, you just cross it out. If it doesn't apply to you, it's okay.
Right. Absolutely.
Make it your own prayer.
Like, I can't say the whole prayer because there's one line. You're like, just don't say that line. It's okay. That's funny. Yeah. So I think that's super helpful for people. So what would you, if I'm going to ask, so this is about nourishing the soul. So where do you think the soul is? What is the soul to you in your view?
Yeah, what a great question. Here's the way I look at it is, we have a body and we have a soul, and they're integrated.
So you do use the word integrated sometimes, just
I do, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that I want to be very clear that I'm not kind of putting out a platonic kind of like there are dualism between body and soul, as if they're like complete. I'm just a physical body that happens to have a soul in it, but know that they're connected and integrated. Yeah. And that I think within the way I see it and how I've been seeing it with parts and everything would be that the inmost, there's a part of the soul, and in the Bible they use the word nous, N-O-U-S, and it's a little complicated because that gets translated as heart a lot of the time, and it applies. Sometimes it has a nuance of mind, and sometimes it's not always easy in translation. But the way I see that heart then is the part of the soul that's that inmost self that I was talking about before, and that is that has the faculty or the ability to connect with God. And so within the soul is all the parts of the self. So we have all of our parts, our soul, but this core inner nous or inner heart that is essential part of that. And I think that we might do sort of evangelism, like the inner, we discover God or have a conversion experience in that inner heart. And I think that's so essential and core, but then we might forget that we have lots of parts that may not have gotten there. And so we're almost evangelizing the whole soul. All of the parts have to learn and discover and heal and be sanctified in the end, as part of the whole process of growing and growing in faith, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's my approach to the soul.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. And so you are somebody who gives a lot. You have a family, you work a lot, you do a lot for the community. So how do you nourish your soul, body, mind, soul?
Yeah. That's a great question. It's funny. I'll just echo that I have a therapist as well. I have a parts work or IFS therapist, so helped me to actually do that work. So it's not just easy to do on your own, even if you're a therapist. So that having time for my own work and really aware is so important. I would say making myself at times having some kind of discipline or ritual around prayer. Like I have a little prayer chapel in my house, like a little room, but it doesn't have to be a room. It could be a corner or something, but I like having a dedicated space. I decorate it I have icons and candles and things like that. And it's like my little sacred space. I mean, I could pray anywhere, of course, as well can, but it's something about being in that space is dedicated time, and feels a little apart from the world. And I think I need that. And the other thing is, honestly, I do think there's a physical connection, and this is where I fail the most is actually, like, I love getting walks. I like hikes. I like being in nature. I like connecting with God in that way. And I get so busy sometimes that I neglect that, in all honesty. So I'm working on it.
Yeah, but we're all working on it. There's always some piece that we're working on. So that's lovely. I'm sitting here thinking, oh, I want to create, I've always had a little altar with, just like a candle and stuff, but I'd love to have a corner or, probably not a whole room. So do other people use your room? Is the whole family can go in there? Is it just for you?
Well, yeah. Well, right now, it's just my wife and I. My kids are all grown now. I have one daughter that's staying with us for a little while right now, but she comes and goes and has her own job in life. So, but we've been mostly nesters for years now. So, but my wife uses the prayer room as well. So it's usually the two of us, and we'll go in there and say the litanies, prayers together. But if all the kids were here, I would say, yeah, everybody use the room and let's all pray together.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah. And I saw that you and your wife read them together, and I was like, oh, I wonder, I can't see my husband doing that with me, but we'll see. I'll just mention it.
Yeah, it doesn't take that long. So what is it, 6 minutes or 7 minutes? So you could do it on a walk, or you could just say it together if he's open to it. I do think like you can do a litany by yourself. And like you mentioned, we have the audio on the website. You can listen to the audio versions, and that can help someone. But there's something about saying them with a group, like when we were testing these litanies, because we did a bunch of testing with people to see how it flowed and everything. And I can remember I was hanging out with all those guys I mentioned, this little group of psychologists, and I passed out the papers and we all said the litanies. So like I started off by doing the main part, like there's a main part and there's a response, and it's sort of rhythmic, right? And so first time I did it with a group and actually heard their responses, it was powerful. It was like there's something about the group experience that is sort of beautiful, I find. I had one of my therapists worked with me, visited a youth group and did a talk, and he actually brought one of the litanies and did it with the youth, with the teenagers. And teenagers are never going to go on and on too much about it, but they seem to like it.
Well, and even, if it helps even a little bit, right? If they don't have to talk about it, that's fantastic. Well, those are great. Beautiful ideas. You've been so helpful in helping me understand some of the things here. So I think this is perfect for people to think about their parts, to work with their parts. I will make sure that we have information to how to reach you, and for soulsandhearts.com, so that people can find the prayers and the courses and all of that. So it's been lovely to talk to you.
Hey, you too. Good to see you.